In 1973, the director of the CIA ordered the destruction of every single file connected to a secret government program. Thousands of pages. Burned. Shredded. Gone. He was terrified of what those documents would reveal. But he missed a box. A single misfiled box of financial records, sent by mistake to the wrong archive, survived the purge. And what was inside changed everything we thought we knew about the US government. This is not a theory. This is not speculation. This is Project MKUltra, and every word you're about to hear comes from declassified CIA documents. The year is 1953. The Cold War is at its most dangerous. The atomic bomb exists. The Iron Curtain has fallen across Europe. And deep inside CIA headquarters, a man signs a document that will launch one of the most disturbing programs in American history. 149 subprojects. 185 researchers, dozens of institutions as universities, hospitals, prisons, all were funded in secret. The subjects? American and Canadian citizens. Most of them had no idea what was being done to them. The goal? To control the human mind. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you'll understand why, in 2025, there are still people suing the government over what happened. And why the full truth may never come out. Origins, Nazis, the Cold War, and the fear of brainwashing. In the early 1950s, the American prisoners of war were returning from Korea, and some of them seemed different, changed. Some made public statements against the United States that seemed rehearsed, robotic. The American public had a word for it, brainwashing. And the CIA had a nightmare. What if the Soviets figured out how to program a human being like a machine? But before any Soviet threat, before any communist fear, there were the Nazi experiments. At Auschwitz and Dachau, Nazi scientists had tested barbiturates, morphine, mescaline, and hallucinogens on prisoners trying to understand how to psychologically break a person. After 1945, those research files ended up in American hands. And here's the part that doesn't make the history books. When the CIA launched its first mind control program in 1950, called Project Bluebird, internal orders explicitly called for placing on the search list of the Nuremberg trials papers requests for information on drugs, narcoanalysis, and special interrogation techniques. The CIA was searching Nazi war crime files for torture techniques it could use itself. Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke. Before MKUltra, there were two predecessor programs that most people have never heard of. Project Bluebird launched in 1950. The stated goal, from the actual documents, controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation. The first test subjects? 25 North Korean prisoners of war. This was only confirmed through documents declassified in 2024 and 2025. Then came Project Artichoke in 1951, more advanced. A 1952 report, freshly declassified, describes the successful use of combined narcosis and hypnosis to induce regression and amnesia in suspected Soviet double agents. And then, on April 13, 1953, everything escalated. The birth of MKUltra. CIA Director Allen Dulles signs the order that creates MKUltra. MK is the technical prefix used by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, and Ultra was chosen to suggest something beyond maximum classification. Dulles was obsessed with one idea. The Soviets had already found a way to reprogram the human mind. He told colleagues that the USSR and China had brainwashed hundreds of American prisoners. He wanted an American answer. He found his answer in a man named Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb was a brilliant chemist, PhD from Caltech. He had a clubfoot and a stammer and a strange passion for folk dancing and growing medicinal herbs on his farm. He was also the head of the CIA's chemical division. And he genuinely believed that he could find a substance or a technique that would give the CIA complete control over human mind. His first major acquisition tells you everything about how far he was willing to go. In the early 1950s, the CIA purchased the entire world supply of LSD from Swiss pharmaceutical company Sandoz for $240,000. That's the equivalent of over $4 million today. Gottlieb believed LSD could be used to extract information from resistant agents, to program Manchurian candidates, style assassins, to drug foreign political leaders before important meetings, and to create selective amnesia. But buying all the LSD in the world was just the beginning. Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA's secret brothels. Of all the things inside MKUltra, this chapter is the one the CIA most wanted to bury. Starting in 1954, the CIA established a network of safe houses in San Francisco, in Telegraph Hill, in Marin County, and in New York City. These apartments were decorated with erotic artwork and one-way mirrors. The operation worked like this. CIA-paid prostitutes would lure men back to these apartments. Without their knowledge, the men were dosed with LSD in their drinks while CIA agents watched from behind the one-way mirrors and took detailed notes. The man running this operation on the ground was George Hunter White, a Federal Narcotics Bureau agent who operated under the alias Morgan Hall. A cowboy-mustached, hard-drinking operative who seemed to find the entire thing enormously entertaining. We know this because, in 1971, as he was dying, White wrote a letter to his former boss Sidney Gottlieb, which survived the 1973 document purge and became one of the most cited documents in CIA history. White wrote that he had been a very minor missionary, actually a heretic who worked wholeheartedly because, in his words, it was fun, fun, fun. He asked where else a red-blooded American boy could lie, kill, cheat, steal, deceive, rape and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest. That letter is a voluntary confession to crimes, written by a man who was absolutely certain no one would ever read it. And he was almost right. Frank Olson, accident, suicide, or murder. Of everything in MKUltra, one story stands above the rest. One man died. One window. 13 floors. And decades of silence. Frank Olson was a microbiologist working for the U.S. Army at Fort Detrick, Maryland. A biological weapons specialist. A quiet family man, completely integrated into the Cold War intelligence structure. On November 19, 1953, Olson attended a CIA research retreat at a cabin in Maryland. That evening, Sidney Gottlieb and his deputy Robert Lashbrook secretly added LSD to the Cointreau being served at dinner. Olson didn't know. Nobody told him. In the days that followed, he became increasingly agitated, paranoid, destabilized. He told colleagues he had made a terrible mistake. He told his family the same, and refused to eat. On November 28, 1953, at 2:30 in the morning, Frank Olson fell through the window of room 1018A of the Statler Hotel in New York. He was on the 13th floor. He died on impact with the sidewalk below. The official verdict: suicide. Severe psychotic break. The CIA's internal verdict: Gottlieb received a formal reprimand, not for drugging a man without consent, but for, quote, failing to take into account the suicidal tendencies already diagnosed in Olson. Frank Olson's family didn't find out about the LSD until 1975, 22 years later, when the Rockefeller Commission made CIA experiments public. They received $750,000 from the U.S. government and personal apologies from President Gerald Ford and CIA Director William Colby. But Olson's son Eric, now a biologist at Harvard, was not satisfied. In 1994, he had his father's body exhumed for a second autopsy, and what the medical examiner found changed everything. There were injuries that could not be explained by a fall or a jump. A blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with being struck before going through the window. Eric Olson's conclusion: his father was murdered, possibly because he knew too much about the CIA's biological weapons programs and was considering going public. The case of Frank Olson remains officially unsolved. Dr. Cameron and the Montreal Horror Experiments. If you want to understand just how far MKUltra was willing to go, you need to go to Montreal, McGill University, a Victorian building on a hill called the Allen Memorial Institute. It looked like a castle, but functioned like a nightmare laboratory. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron was, on paper, one of the most respected psychiatrists in the world. Scottish-born, professor at McGill and president of the World Psychiatric Association. He was also a man who believed he could erase the human mind and rewrite it from zero. His theory was called de-patterning. and his methods were brutal. Massive electroshock, 2 to 3 times per day at 150 volts, for 6 seconds each, 10 times stronger than standard medical protocol. Drug-induced sleep lasting days or weeks. One case lasted 86 days in a chemical coma. Large doses of LSD and mescaline. Complete sensory deprivation. Headphones. Blackout goggles. Once the patient was de-patterned, reduced, in Cameron's own documents, to a vegetative state, he moved to the next phase. Psychic driving. Patients, immobilized and sedated, were forced to listen to recorded messages played on a loop, for 16 hours a day. Messages attacking their identity first, then positive suggestions. Some messages were repeated hundreds of thousands of times. The CIA funded all of this, secretly, through a front organization called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. Cameron received $69,000 between 1957 and 1964. The Canadian government added another $500,000. Cameron may never have known the money came from the CIA. Or maybe he did. The debate continues. What is not debated is what happened to his patients. Hundreds of people went to Cameron for anxiety, mild depression, and other ordinary human struggles. They left with total amnesia lasting years. Some couldn't recognize their own children. One patient forgot how to run the business he'd built over decades. And in 2025, a class action lawsuit in Montreal is still underway, targeting the Canadian government, McGill University, and Royal Victoria Hospital, seeking full compensation for victims who never received it. This case is still open. The cover-up and the reckoning. By 1972, Sidney Gottlieb himself ordered MKUltra to stop. But the real crisis came in 1973. CIA Director Richard Helms, knowing that congressional investigations were closing in, gave the order to destroy all MKUltra files. Thousands of pages burned, shredded, disappeared. But Helms missed that one misfiled box. In 1974, journalist Seymour Hersh published a bombshell article in the New York Times revealing that the CIA had run experiments on American citizens. The public was stunned. Congress demanded answers. In 1975, the Church Committee, the Senate's investigation into CIA abuses, held the first public hearings. For the first time, Americans learned their government had drugged citizens without consent, run secret brothels, and experimented on prisoners. Sidney Gottlieb appeared before the committee under a false name, Joseph Scheider. He claimed he remembered almost nothing. In 1977, a FOIA request uncovered 20,000 surviving MKUltra documents in the financial archive that had escaped destruction. Senate hearings chaired by Ted Kennedy brought the first public victim testimony. And then, in 2017, Gottlieb's secret church committee testimony was finally declassified. In it, he admitted the truth about MKUltra's results. He said that the results of everything showed that the money expended, the effort expended, the security risk involved, and when you add everything up, it was probably not a high payoff program. After decades of experiments on human beings, after an unknown number of victims, after destroying the evidence, it didn't even work. What we still don't know. Here's the part of this story that keeps researchers up at night. We know what survived the 1973 destruction, but we don't know what burned. There are 5 questions that no declassified document has ever fully answered. 1. How many people died? Frank Olson is the only confirmed death, but the files were burned. How many others disappeared into anonymity? 2. How many test subjects from Operation Midnight Climax were ever located or informed? A 1977 Senate report stated that nobody knows where they are or what effects they may have suffered. 3. Were Manchurian candidates actually created? Gottlieb said no, but internal documents show the program was never fully explored. A former CIA officer, Alfred McCoy, argues the real goal wasn't science fiction mind control, it was efficient interrogation. And those methods, he says, worked. 4. The Cubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual, declassified by the Pentagon in 1996 and nicknamed the Torture Manual, contains sensory deprivation and psychological disorientation techniques that look remarkably similar to Cameron's methods. Were those techniques used? 5. Does anything like this continue today? No declassified document gives a complete answer, and nobody who ran MKUltra was ever criminally prosecuted. Sidney Gottlieb died in 1999, quietly. Richard Helms died in 2002. George White had died in 1975. Not one criminal conviction. Not even one. MKUltra ended officially in 1973. The documents were burned. The men responsible died free, but its shadow stretches further than most people realize. Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and the founder of the Merry Pranksters counterculture movement, was a voluntary subject in CIA-funded LSD experiments at a VA hospital in Menlo Park, California. Those experiments helped launch the 1960s counterculture. The CIA, trying to build the ultimate weapon of control, accidentally helped spark one of the greatest cultural revolutions in American history. The National Security Archive published over 1,200 newly processed MKUltra documents in 2024. Researchers are still going through them. New details keep emerging. The story isn't over. If you think this video needs to exist, that people need to know what their government did with their tax money and their citizens, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment. What question about MKUltra do you want answered next? Because there's a lot more in those 20,000 surviving documents. And we're just getting started.